Hello and welcome to episode 26 of my Dark Souls video guide.
That's an odd ember you have there. I know what you're thinking, but I'm no good with those. It won't be easy, but I'm afraid you'll have to look for someone else.
So before we head into the Catacombs, it is advisable to have a divine weapon. Now, one way to get one is to use the divine ember, give it to the blacksmith and turn a +5 weapon into a divine weapon. This only requires a green titanite shard. Alternatively, you could take the occult club that you can get in Anor Londo and revert it back to a divine +5 club. Neither of these options will give you a very high damage divine weapon, but you don't really need that much damage for it. Basically, there are enemies in the Catacombs which will regenerate unless they are killed with the divine weapon. There are some other options aside from upgrading a generic weapon, because there are specific weapons that have the divine property by default. But first, I was going to show you the end of my infection on this character. And once you have reached this level, your kick actually gets replaced with this sort of maggot attack, which looks kind of cool, but it's very, very weak. Even the early game enemies still take 2 hits to be killed by it. So it's not useful, it's just funny to see. And yeah, there's the Silver Knight Spear, which also is divine by default, which you can get from the Silver Knight Knights in Anor Londo, Silver Knights. And of course the Great Sword of Artorias, the non-cursed version that this character uses.
Sorry, fool. You could not be the chosen one. Enough. I shall slumber until I am awakened again.
Now remember, I fought the 4 kings on this character already. Again, more on that in a later video. And he's a member of the Darkwraith Covenant now. And if you hand in the Lord Vessel with the other snake, then Fremd will basically say you're not the chosen one, and he will leave for the rest of the playthrough. So that is something to bear in mind. Now the skeletons in the graveyard do not regenerate. Doesn't matter which weapon you kill them with, they do not come back. But in the Catacombs proper, which we're going to enter now, the enemies will not die unless you kill them with a divine weapon or the necromancer controlling them is killed. And obviously the way it's designed, usually the necromancer is hiding behind the skeletons that he controls. You can still do this without a divine weapon, but using one makes it a lot easier and you can just take your time and you don't have to rush anything. So if you have any means to get a divine weapon, I would recommend using one. Now there's a bottomless pit here with a bunch of exploding skulls. And then a bit of a room. If you stick to the wall as I do here, then the 2 skeletons in this room do not actually stand up and attack. There's 2 more right here, and then you have to go into this broken wall in the side here, because that's where the necromancer is hiding. And killing him means the skeletons here can now be killed with a normal weapon. And you also need to push this button to open a door that allows you to go further into the area. And then of course while you're here there's a convenient bonfire which you can take advantage of. If you didn't kill the skeletons, they might actually run down here before you can rest at the bonfire, but as I said, once the necromancer's dead, the skeletons are just normal enemies, and even a non-divine standard weapon like this one kills them. Now there's actually a very easy way to tell if you've killed the skeleton. If you get souls, then you've killed it permanently. If you didn't get souls, then it's going to come back. Now across the chasm here you can see another necromancer who will be shooting fireballs at you. So if you're not using a divine weapon, then a good way to get rid of these 3 skeletons is to stand pretty much where I'm standing right now. And the skeletons, if you've aggroed them, will try to get to you, but their pathfinding is not the greatest and they will fall down into the pit. Now keep in mind, this doesn't kill them. This is a pit that is a lethal drop, so they die from the drop, but the necromancer is still alive right now, so they will actually come back. This is also, however, a way to really quickly get through this area and basically skip all of it. So I'm going to show you this as a quick aside here. You can drop down and then drop down a second time. And then this takes you to this ledge. Firstly there's a soul item, and then if you're human there's a summoning sign, which can be very helpful because the summon is actually quite powerful, and there are some nasty enemies on the bottom of the pit down below. Now, if you have actually pushed some skeletons down here with the trick I've just shown you, they will still be alive down here, and so bear in mind that there could be some normal skeletons here, in addition to the bone wheels, which we're about to see. So you can kind of see them down below, but I'm going to drop down and loot this corpse, and then you can get a slightly better look at them. And basically, the Paladin Leroy summon is usually capable of handling them. Sometimes he dies, it's really random, but most of the time he basically crushes them with relative ease. I'm going to show you the rest of this section later on in the video, but this is a really quick way to get down here, and also you can use the summon for the boss fight. Now the Necromancer, as you approach, tries to run away, but you can rush him and actually kill him before he can make it further back in the area. But yeah, if you don't have a divine weapon, I would recommend trying to get the guy killed as quickly as possible. You can even snipe him from across the chasm, but yeah, that requires a ranged option on your character. It doesn't have to be a good ranged option, they can even be poisoned with poison arrows, so if you've got the patience you can kill them that way. Also keep in mind that the necromancers do not regenerate, so you only have to kill them once, and then when you die and respawn, skeletons will still not be respawning. And there's the Lucerne. And it's always easier to get through these areas when the skeletons do not come back, because then you don't have to rush it, you can just take your time, kill them individually. And it's not actually a difficult area. This video is going to be a little bit all over the place, simply because of how the area is designed. I will have to do some asides and you will see some sections more than once, but I couldn't really find a good way to avoid that. Now here you can again take advantage of a long-range weapon. You can see a necromancer in the background there. It's just sort of at the edge of where you can reach him with most ranged means. So most bows should still be able to get him. A short bow might not be. I'm not using the Hawk Ring here, by the way, so you could use that to extend your bow range a bit more. And as I said, I'm using fire arrows here, but you could use poison arrows, and you only have to hit him twice and he'll be poisoned, and then you can just wait for him to die. And again, this makes the next section a bit easier, because the skeletons won't be coming back after you kill them. And you can also kill these two by aggroing them, and then they'll try to get to you and fall to their death. Now here, we see the first examples of statues that have spikes coming out of them. And some of the statues do, and some don't. It's really easy to tell. The statues that have a sort of ornamental mask shield thing on their middle section, those will have spikes coming out, the other ones don't. And here we can see a bonfire, we'll get to that later on. And here's a corpse. Remember, this area, we'll get back to it in, well, a short section, in a short while. Now by pulling that, or pushing that lever in, rather, you can cross this bridge. And right in here to the side, there's a nice little optional part. There are 2 crystal lizards here, which give you white titanite or green titanite if you're less lucky. But as all crystal lizards, they always give you 2 twinkling titanite. So if you're interested in any of those kinds of items, you can get them here. And if you didn't kill one of them in time, you can reload, and yeah, it'll be back, and you can kill it then. And at the end of the corridor there's a stair, or ladder, leading up. And then another hole to drop down through. And that's why I told you to remember the corner earlier. This is where that corner is. So this is the lever we pushed in to flip that bridge. And yeah, of course, the skeletons might be coming back if you haven't killed the necromancer. Now there's another necromancer, and the easiest way to get to him is to do the drops as I'm doing here. You can then pick up this great scythe, and down here is another necromancer. And there's also some skeletons, but of course once you kill the necromancer, the skeletons do not come back. Each of the necromancers has a slim chance to drop a skull lantern, which is basically a light source that you want to have for the later parts of the area, or it's useful for the later parts of the area. However, the chance of the early necromancers dropping one is pretty slim. It's a rare drop. But the last necromancer in the Catacombs, whichever one you kill last, is guaranteed to drop one unless you've already gotten one. So they basically have a base chance of, let's say, 1% to give you the Skull Lantern. And if you've killed all of them, the very last one has a 100% chance unless you already have one, in which case he only has the standard chance. And yeah, you can also, of course, go the other way to get to this necromancer. Now here, if you just walk off this ledge, do not run or jump off, just walk off. Same with the second ledge, just walk off. You can drop down quite safely, and there's a bit of a hole, after which you get a nice little cutscene.
Be gone with you. You'll spoil my focus.
And this is another blacksmith.
Why, is that an ember from New Londo? And a fine ember it be. What do you say? Why not leave it with me? I'll give you a flame to feast your eyes upon.
And he handles fire upgrades.
We'll get these old bones to work.
So you can modify any weapon that's +5 into a fire weapon. And he can do this fire upgrade without any embers. And then you can use more green titanite shards to basically make these up to level 5, so fire +5.
If that'll be all, then be gone with you. You'll spoil my focus. Why, that's an ember unlike any that I have seen. A very curious pattern. Could it be the flame of the legendary witch? I know. Suppose you left that ember with me. Old Vamos would never let you down. No, not ever.
And he takes both of the embers from Isolith.
Yes, splendid. Splendid indeed. My, oh my, you precious little thing.
And then you can modify +5 fire weapons either into fire +6 to just basically make them more fiery, and you can also turn them into chaos weapons, which you can then upgrade with right titanite chunks and slabs into fire up to +10 and chaos up to +5. Fire is just like lightning, it removes any scaling from the weapon and makes it do fire damage. Chaos kind of works the same way, except after removing the normal scaling, it gives it scaling with your humanity level. So your soft humanity up to 10 points makes the weapon do more damage. Chaos tends to do more damage if you have really high soft humanity. Fire is better if you've got maybe 0 to 5. Alright, now the other way, if you don't want to drop down to the necromancer. There's a corpse here with an item on it, but you can avoid the spikes coming from the statue if you move carefully. This is basically where we drop down to the blacksmith, but coming from the other side. It's just another way to get to the same location. And then in this room here to the side, again, the necromancer might still be alive, so in this case the skeletons would be coming back, but this character is using the Silver Knight Spear, which is divine without any upgrades. It's actually a very convenient weapon because it doesn't require any faith and it does straight physical damage, but it still has the divine property, so you're not losing out on damage basically. And then this is the same spiral where I dropped down just now to get to the blacksmith, where the necromancer is. Of course, if you come from this way, you did not grab the great scythe yet. But after pushing this lever in, the pathway to the next section opens and you can actually still grab the great scythe by dropping out down from the broken stairs on the outside. So you just head straight, and again this is the same section where I dropped down earlier, and this takes you to the scythe. Now you can also drop down here, and again remember this spot. I'll tell you where you end up if you drop down later on, but for now I do not intend to drop down there. It's another shortcut, but I want to show you everything, so I'm not going to do that. And then through this tunnel here, you end up at a bridge that you cannot cross. However, there is an NPC who, well, changes things a bit. So firstly, I would suggest you go to this bonfire here and rest at it. This is the bonfire we saw from the earlier section, which I told you about, and basically we've reached it now. So there is an NPC here who turns the bridge around so you can walk across it. However, he is trying to trap you, so if you walk across it again, you will fall down. So you can talk to him. It's Patches, very well-known character, and he's just standing here.
Good day. You look reasonably sane. What are you doing in the Catacombs? Are you a cleric or something? No? Well, that's strange. Oh, I know what it is. You've come for the trinkets, haven't you? Well, whatever it is. This place is treacherous. Do you watch your step? Huh? Oh, well, how are you then? I sort of lost my way, yes. But when I came here, I didn't touch any levers. No, not me. Very peculiar, isn't it? Wait, did something happen to you? Hey, don't look at me like that. I'm Trusty Patches, the one and only. Everything's good with us, eh? Oh, come on. Take it. We'll be wonderful friends.
Alright, so basically this bridge here leading up to this fog gate, he's turned it around. And it doesn't matter if you talk to him or not, doesn't matter what you say to him. If you walk across it, he will turn it and you fall to your death. If you sprint across it, you will actually make it to the other side without dying. So that's a way to bypass this trap. But if you linger, if you wait, as I did intentionally there, he does just drop you to your death. And then you can confront him about it.
Oh, well, how are you then? I slipped and flipped that lever, you see. It didn't cause you any trouble by chance? Oh, really? Yes, I see. Rightio. Then everything's good, isn't it? I'm Trusty Patches, the one and only. You and I, just a couple of undead outcasts. Right, my darling?
And now at this point you are fully within your rights to just, well, kill him.
Oh, curses. I'm finished. What did I ever...
And he drops the Crescent Axe, which is another weapon that is divine by default. Now, if you tell him that he actually did cause you trouble, then he will give you a humanity. If you tell him he didn't, then yeah, he doesn't give you anything. But it really doesn't make much of a difference. And it doesn't matter if you tell him that you're a cleric or not, he will flip the switch on you and try to kill you either way. Right, so there's another necromancer. in this area, so these skeletons, without the use of a divine weapon, will come back. Of course, this is my cleric, so she does have a divine weapon, which means we're fine. And behind this broken wall, there's a bit of a gauntlet of skeletons. Without a divine weapon, this is quite difficult. Because there's archers killing you, and you can't really get rid of them, obviously, if you can't stop them from respawning. So I would strongly suggest using a divine weapon here, or if you don't have one and you really can't get one, then don't bother trying to fight these skeletons, just run through. And I'll show you what's behind the section in just a moment. But obviously, if you have one, feel free to just slowly kill these skeletons, so you're safe and you don't have to rush things. As you go towards the end of this corridor, there's a large skeleton dropping down, but don't worry, they're not actually that scary, they're kind of slow, so it's not much of a deal. And in this sarcophagus you can find a Dark Moon Seance Ring, which will come in handy at a later point of the game. Alright, and then we move up here. And there's another necromancer right up here. And as I said, each necromancer has a chance to drop the skull lantern, but only the last one, which I'll show you later, is guaranteed to drop one. So if you killed all of them, you're guaranteed to have at least one skull lantern, but you could have more. The standard chance to drop one is still there, even if you've already gotten one. Right, so if you take this miracle and drop down, you end up right in the beginning of the area. So I would suggest not doing that, instead going back and sliding down this ladder. And going back to where you've killed the necromancer. And there's a broken section of wall here, which you can jump through to get to, the earlier part, before you actually broke that wall to get through the skeleton gauntlet. Now, you can actually also use ranged means to kill the necromancer from within that room by basically shooting through that opening that I just jumped through. And again, this enables you to deal with him before dealing with the skeletons, and then you can use a standard weapon to handle the next section. But here I'm using a character that has a really weak divine weapon. So he doesn't do much damage against the skeletons, but it's still sufficient to kill them. Especially when you go fishing for backstabs. They don't have much health, maybe 200 or so. So it's pretty easy to deal with them. Okay, and now remember that section earlier where I didn't jump down? This is where you end up. Right after the Great Scythe, basically, you can drop down and you end up here. Again, cutting out a large section of the area. But now we're actually almost done. At the back of this hallway, we can see a Titanite demon. And it's a pretty nasty one, so yeah, be careful. I actually didn't kill the necromancer on this particular character, so the skeleton is going to come back. But if you keep your distance, it's fine. It doesn't actually cause me any trouble here. Of course, the best way to deal with Titanite demons is still to use ranged means, simply because they are pretty nasty at close range. But of course, you can use close range as well. And there's actually a very peculiar sarcophagus here that you can, well, use as a means of transportation. So there's some Eyes of Death on a corpse here, which are very handy. And you can nestle in this coffin. Now it takes a while for this to start. Basically I'm showing you the sort of real time. I didn't want to speed this up. It's similar to how you go into the nest to go back to the asylum, which I've shown you in an earlier episode. It just takes a while to start the cutscene to take you there. But don't worry, if you're in here, there's no way it can fail, basically. It's just a matter of waiting. And before you do this, you do want to have some Eyes of Death. It's actually something that some players do really early on in the game to get a nice early game weapon, which I'll show you in a short moment. But you need some Eyes of Death, which conveniently are on a corpse right there, so that's a good way to to get those. I've also farmed some more from the basilisks in the depths, so in the sewers, the kind of frog things. Those can also drop Eyes of Death, so I farmed some there, so I would have 10, because you'll see in a moment why I wanted 10. But this takes you to a version of the final boss of this entire section, so not just the catacombs, but the area behind it as well. However, you can't actually fight the boss here. You cannot damage it at all. This is just where you can join his covenant. And you need Eyes of Death because they're the covenant item. Now, right in that huge coffin is the Gravelord Nito. But as you can see, you can't actually damage him here. You can't fight the boss this way. You can just join the covenant. And joining it immediately gives you the Gravelord Sword and the Gravelord Sword Dance. And then you can offer Eyes of Death. If you've offered him 10, you will rank up to level 1 in the Covenant, or level 2, let's just say +1. And this will give you the upgraded version of the Miracle as well. And I'll show you those at some later point. They're not very useful, but they're kind of cool looking. But the sword does good damage, and for how early in the game you can get here is actually pretty powerful. So some players like to basically get here really early on, because the catacombs are an early game area if you want them to be. There's nothing keeping you from going here right after you've reached Firelink. And you can just drop down in various locations as I've shown you, and get to this particular section really early, join the Covenant, get the sword, and just have a good damage option really early on. And then by lying down in the sarcophagus again, you basically get taken back to where you started. Again, you get a short little cutscene where someone closes the lid on you and then you get transported around. Yeah, it's not particularly interesting, but I didn't want to skip it. And if you didn't kill the Titanite demon, then the location where you get out of this coffin here is actually not close enough to aggro him. So if you run any closer, he will eventually aggro, of course, but from right here, you would be perfectly safe. Alright, and then, yeah, let's head further through. We're basically almost done with the normal way of getting through here. And I've already shown you this sped up way to get down in various places. So right here, there's 2 skeletons down below. If you don't have a divine weapon, I would suggest walking around on the upside. And they will eventually try to get to you and climb up the ladder. And once they're climbing or have reached the top, you can jump down and that'll basically give you more breathing room to get to the final necromancer before they can get to you. But with a divine weapon, you don't need to worry about that. 2 archers here, and the final necromancer is hiding behind them. And then through the open wall there, you can also reach the open area at the bottom with the bone wheels, which I will show you in more detail in just a moment. There's various ways to get down to the bottom, so I don't want to show that section every time. Just suffice it to say you can reach it in multiple ways. Now if you drop through the floor here, you actually meet a Black Knight. This is the only Black Knight in the game without the final area that has a Greataxe, which is a very powerful weapon, and probably my favorite from the Black Knight weapons. And then you can also drop down to the open area from here. Now I would suggest actually waiting on this little ledge, because the bone wheels are not that strong by themselves. They don't have good defense, they take very little damage to kill. But this spinning rolling attack can be incredibly damaging, and it's very difficult to block it as well. So it might be worth your time to wait until the four bone wheels that are close by have all aggroed on you, and they'll just be spinning into the wall below the ledge, and then you can drop down and basically use the moment of confusion to kill them quite quickly without having to worry about getting spun to death. And then I also like to always make these skulls explode, because otherwise I might forget and sort of back away while fighting the skeletons, and then they might, yeah, they might get me and explode and do damage, and all of that would be a bit nasty. And there are a lot of bone wheels down here, but if you play it carefully, you can get them one by one, and it's not so bad to fight them. They can also drop their shield, which is kind of, it's not very good as a shield, but it's a bit funny because you can actually use it to attack. Again, I'll show you that in a weapon showcase at some later point. Now, once all of these bone wheels are dead, you can make it to the other end of this valley, chasm, whatever you want to call it, to meet the boss. And these items that you can see in the background, you can only get those by dropping down from above. So I've shown you that as well, where I've summoned the Paladin Leroy. That's a, yeah, that's the way to get them. Anyway, the boss itself is actually really easy. Because of how early you can get to this area, the designers made the boss kind of simple, because you're supposed to possibly be able to fight him at a low level. But most players end up fighting him at a really high level, or decent upgrade level, like I do. So this boss is, for most players, not going to cause much of an issue. To the point where the things that make it kind of challenging will never actually affect most players, because they get here after having beaten Ornstein and Smo at least. So usually they would have a weapon that's plus 10, maybe even plus 15, or a special weapon that's upgraded decently. And they would be level maybe 50, 60, depending again on the order they do things in. And at that point this boss is just a joke. You'll see in a moment how much damage I do. Does not take long to kill it. And yeah, that's the end of the Catacombs. We now get the Rite of Kindling, which allows us to kindle bonfires beyond the usual 10 flasks up to 20 flasks. And yeah, the next area will be explored in the next episode after a boss guide, of course. So I hope you found this helpful. Have a nice day. Bye bye.